All right. So we are looking at measures of center is technically what this is called. And so there's a couple of blanks for us to fill out first. The first blank is going to be the word center. So mean, median, mode are categories of measures of center. Okay, so if you hear that phrase, that's really just asking you to find those three things. This is also known as your central tendency. So those are the next two blanks, central tendency. So what this is having us do is look at key characteristics of our data. Okay, so mean is one thing that we're going to first find. So that's our first example here. What do we know about the mean? What is that? What's another word that we can use to describe mean? It starts with an A. If I'm finding, because here's what it tells me here. If I'm finding the sum of the data and then dividing it, we're adding them up. What is it? It starts with an A and then a V. Average. Good. So this is like especially important in case of sports, right? If you're a sports player and maybe you're playing basketball and you want to know what is your average points per game, that's really calculating the mean. You're adding up all the points that you've scored in your total, game career, dividing by how many games that you have. Same thing for your batting average, right? If you play softball, you play baseball. Whenever you hit a ball and you actually get a hit, make it to base, that is counted as a hit, right? And you divide that by how many total games you've played. That's the average, okay? So if I want to do that, I'm going to do that for example 1. Find the mean, find the average. So we want to add up all of these numbers here. So with your calculator or with your phone for just this, you can add up all of those numbers, and that's going to be that number that goes on top of my fraction. So the sum, or us adding all of them up, is going to go on top. On the bottom is going to be the total numbers. You should get 246 as your sum. And then how many total numbers do I have in my list? We can count those up as well. 8 numbers. Good. So we're going to take the sum, divide that by my total, which is 8. Okay, and so when I get that, my answer is 30.75. So that is the mean or the average of all those numbers. Okay, so we want to remember mean is your average, adding everything up, dividing by total. Yeah.
I got 240. I got 214 too.
It should be 246. Did you count 32 twice?
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Oh,
yeah. Wow. Yeah, there should be another, because I got 246. There should be one more. There's 232s there. Okay, so there's your mean. Now the median. So we've done this before. We've done the median before with the histograms. But now we actually have my list of numbers here, so I don't have to worry about looking at the histogram. We have our list. So here's the rule. The median is that middle number, but I have to put my numbers in order from least to greatest. So right now, could I just start finding the median of these numbers? No, we cannot, right? They're not in order. So you can go small to big or big to small. I like to go smallest to largest, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to cross out the numbers as I rewrite them. So the smallest is 23, and then the next one would be 24, then 27, 30, 32, another 32, 38, and then 40. So those are going to be all of my numbers in order, okay? And so how we now find the median, how I like to do it is I go from end to end and start crossing numbers off. So if I'm going to cross 23 off, I have to cross the other end of 40, and I'm slowly working my way until I get to the middle. So then I'm going to cross 24 and 38. 27 and then 32. And here's where we run into an issue. If I cross 30, I also have to cross 32, and now I don't have any numbers, right? So if this happens, if you have 2 numbers in the middle, we now need to say, well, what's the middle of my middle numbers? 31. So this one's easier to visualize. But if you do not know, maybe, and we'll get to an example like that in a second, if you're not sure, you can then find the average of those 2 numbers. So we can say 30 plus 32 over 2. That could help me find the middle of the middle numbers. So that's 62 over 2, which is 31, like we said. Okay, so sometimes it is easy to see what is the middle between 30 and 32.
Isn't the last, like, median, or which one is, like, the one that, if there's two the same numbers, you put that?
That's mode. So that's what we're going to get to next. Yes, on the next page. Okay, so that's the example if you have an even number in your list. If you have an even number of numbers, you're going to have to look at the two middle numbers and then find the middle of those. But let's look at example 3. So now I'm going to put these numbers in order from least to greatest. So let's do that. So we have 21, 22, 24, 34, 38, 40, and 42. Okay? Just to show you how they're a little bit different. So the first one, we had an even number. We had, I think, what was that? 8 numbers in my list. But look at what happens now. If I cross off end to end, if I cross 21 and 42, I cross 22 and 40, 24 and 38, I really am just left with only one number in the middle. Yeah, that's my answer. I don't have to think what's the middle of that. There is only one middle number. And so there were 7 numbers in that list versus 8. So sometimes they'll go a little bit different. Okay, so next page, yes, the mode. This one's the easiest in my opinion. I always like the mode because that one's just the number, the data item that occurs the most. Good. What if I have all of my numbers only appearing once? Would I have a mode? No, you don't have to have a mode. You do have a median and you do have a mean, but you may not have a mode. You may not have something that appears the most. Okay, so example 5 here is going to have us find the mean, median, mode of the following grades. I guess we're just saying grade of a test, okay? So then we can, that's it. Just find the mean, median, mode. So you may want to write small, yes.
Say there's 2 modes. Do you just add them, or what do you do?
So if they're, like, let's say I added another 30 to that list, you would just say there's 2 modes then. You would have 30 and 32 as your mode. You would not do anything with them. You would just write both of them down.
Right.
But that's a good question. Okay, so let's go ahead and just put my numbers for example 5 in order from least to greatest, because we know we're going to need to do that for the median anyways. So let's go ahead and start there. So we have 50 and another 50, 53, 66, 77, 78, 88, 90, 98, 98, and another 98. So putting them in order also helps you identify the mode right away. So we can, I don't know, I'm going to write off to the side here. Mode, median, mean, and we can kind of fill those in. Okay, so we know the mode is 98. That is the number that appears the most in my list. Appears 3 times. Now that I have my numbers in order, I can start working on the median. So I'm going to start crossing off from end to end. So I'm crossing the 50 and the 98. Another 50 and a 98. A 53 and a 98. The 66 and the 90. And then the 77 and the 88 until I'm left with one number in the middle there, which is 78. So that would be my median. Okay? And then the mean, this is where I'm going to add up all of those numbers and divide by how many numbers do I have in my list, okay? So again, that is by taking the sum, or adding them up, over your total. So we can say the sum, we should get 846. And again, I'm assuming that once you guys are working on this on your own, you will be able to type them in. I know we can type numbers in, so I'm going kind of fast. 846 is your sum. And how many total numbers do I have in my list? 11. Good. So you'll just have to count that. So there's 11 numbers. So then we can divide 846 by 11 to give us 76.9. Okay? So there's my mean. So that's all we're working on today is mode, median, mean. Yes?
I guess you didn't get my question. What I meant was, like, say there's 50 and 50, okay? And then there's 33 and 33. What do you do then?
Then you say your
That's
mode
what
is
I'm
50 and 33. So you just write two modes, two numbers. Yes. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at example 6. This is a really good question. And I see this a lot on the PSAT, which all of us are taking next week. And then also on the map test. Okay. So all of us take the PSAT next week, next Wednesday. So that's what we'll be doing next Wednesday after Easter break. So I see this come up a lot on the test. So we should be able to answer this correctly now. Okay, so here's the question. If I add a number to my list, what if I add 85? Someone scored an 85 on a test. What's going to happen to my mean, median, and my mode? Okay, so let's not try to do everything over again. Let's just use this to our advantage. We've already done a lot of the work. So what I want to do is if I'm adding 85 to my list, I'm going to use the numbers that I already have in order. I'm just going to squeeze in an 85 directly between the 78 and the 88, right? So let's rewrite my list, just putting another 85 in the list there, okay? So we're going to rewrite the 50, 53, 66, 77. Did you write them on the wrong spot? That's fine. So just draw an arrow to flip them around. 78, but now I'm going to add in that new number of 85. Again, we're trying to go in order. So 85 would go right in between the 78 and the 88. Everything else is getting rewritten. So we don't really have to think too much on that one. We just have to think, where is my number now getting put in? Okay? So also, how many numbers do I have in my list now? 12. I added one extra number. So this is going to cause me to have two numbers in the middle. So if I start crossing out 50, 98, 50, 98, 53, 98, 66, 90, 77, 88, look at what happens. I now have two numbers left in the middle because I now have an even number of numbers in my list. And so I need to figure out what is directly in between 78 and 85. Now, this one's going to be harder to figure out, right? We don't know what directly is in between 78 and 85 by just looking at it. So this is where I can add those numbers up. If you do 78 plus 85 and you divide that by 2, we're finding the average of them. Yeah, 81.5. Good. Is what you get. So that means 81.5 is a number directly in between 78 and 85. Right, which is a decimal, which is why that was going to be hard to figure out on our own. So there is my new mean. New median. So what happened? My median was 78 originally. Now I'm up to 81.5. What happened there? It went up. That is because the number that I added to my list, 85, was higher than my median originally. So if you're going to add a number that's higher than your median, it's going to pull the median up, okay? So let's think about my mode. Did my mode change at all? No, it didn't, right? I still have 398s, so that's not going to change. So we can say mode is the same. But now we want to figure out my new mean. Let's not type in everything again. We knew the sum of my original list was 846. All I'm doing now is adding 85 to that. So I can now say my new total is going to be the original total plus 85. And again, how many numbers do I have now? We are 12, right? We're not going to divide by 11. We added one more number. So we're going to divide by 12. So use that to your advantage. Don't completely start over. 77.5. We can round to 6, 77.6. So what happened to my mean? Here was my original mean that I have circled. Here's my new one. What happened there? It also went up. That's because, again, that number 85 is higher than my original mean. So if you're adding numbers that are larger, it's going to keep bringing your mean and your median up. Okay. Last little thing that we're going to talk about today is the definition of an outlier, which I think a lot of us already know. An outlier is a number in your data that doesn't really fit. So if I'm looking at all these numbers, anywhere from 20 and like 30, I have a really, really large number, one way over 100. So that one's going to be the outlier. So for this example, we just want to identify what is the outlier, okay? Yeah, 5. And this first one, definitely 5, right? All of the rest of my numbers are like high up between 60 and 80. What about in my next data set? Good. all of these numbers are between 1 and 10. And then I have a random 333. So that one definitely is way too high. Okay. Let's go to the last page here. This is just kind of summing everything up. Okay. This is important to know. We're no longer just kind of doing the junior high way of mean median mode where we just need to know how to do the calculations. We want to use a little bit of application there. So let's fill in our words first, and then we'll talk about what this means. So the first one is mean. The second one is median. The last blank is mode. So let's talk here. So my mean, if I'm going to use the mean to tell me what's, what that measure of central tendency is, which is the phrase I used at the beginning of class, we'll use the mean when my data is spread out evenly, meaning I don't have an outlier. All the numbers are kind of close to each other, right? You would probably say the mean is going to best represent the average there. But if I have an outlier, right, and we'll talk about what is going to happen in a second. If I have an outlier, your median is probably going to be most useful because that's going to be the middle number versus the average, because we'll talk about what happens if you take the average with an outlier. Something will happen there. Okay, and then my mode. Your mode is only important if maybe you're trying to figure out what number appears the most, right? Like maybe with an election. What person was voted on the most, right? Whoever has the most amounts. Usually mode isn't that important unless if you're trying to figure out what number appears the most, things like that. Maybe which one is most common. Okay, so last example for today. It just wants to know what is going to best represent my data, the mean or the median, okay? So let's calculate those two things, and then we'll kind of figure out by looking at the list, looking at my mean and median, what one is going to better represent it, okay? So let's go ahead and start with the median. Are my numbers in order from least to greatest? Or largest to smallest? Yes, they are in order. So we do not need to go ahead and do that. We can just start finding the median. So let's cross out from either end, 0 and 25, 1 and 7, 2 and 6, 5 and 6. And I like this example because I have 2 5s left in the middle. Well, what's in between 5 and 5? 5, right? There is nothing in between 5 and 5. So if you have the same number, then your median is that number. Okay, there's nothing in between. 5 is in between. Okay, so there's my median. So my mean is now going to be me adding up all of my numbers. Okay, so we have, you really don't need to type in the 0, but you can. You should get a sum of 62. But here's what's important, because sometimes people, if they skip typing in the 0, which is fine, they sometimes forget to count 0. But we have to count 0 as a number. So really I have 10 numbers in this list. 0 counts as a number. So we have 62 divided by 10, which gives me 6.2. So let's take a look, okay? The majority of my number, we're either looking, is 5 a better representation of this data, or is 6.2 a better as your central, right, or your center. So are the majority of my numbers closer to 5, or are they closer to 6.2? And think of it like this. Are the majority of my numbers greater than 5 or less than 5, or greater than 6 or less than 6? Where are we kind of at? Closer to the 5, right? Because as you can see, majority of my numbers here are less than that 5. Only a couple of them are more than the 5. Whereas for the 6.2, only 4 numbers in that list are kind of greater than the 6.2. And so let me show you what happens. You don't have to write this down, but maybe you can see what's going on. What number in that list would be your outlier? Probably 25, right? 25 is kind of a lot of movies to go see a year. That's just a person who maybe likes movies. So if I take out that outlier and I try to calculate my mean again, look at what happens. So my new sum is 37. I only took out one number though, but look how my sum drastically decreased. So if I do 37 divided by 9, my new mean is 4.1. So look at that change. One outlier is really going to cause your mean, if it's a higher outlier, it's going to cause your mean to jump a lot, okay? Whereas if maybe your outlier is really, really small, it's going to cause it to go down a lot. So an outlier, that was me just taking, if I took away that outlier and recalculated it again. You don't need to write that down. But hopefully we can kind of see that an outlier is going to cause your mean to be really, really high or really, really low, depending on what type of outlier it's going to be. Okay? So,